whatever is the biggest story of the day, of the time. You're constantly moving, whether you're moving different cities, different stations, different jobs. So it was nice to be able to see this one through from beginning to end and watch how it progressed. The challenge with Councilman Shanklin is because obviously she's such a beloved member of the community, and most people, even her own colleagues, look on her very fondly. Yet some of the things being said about her were pretty awful. And so the challenge is walking that line with respecting, where she's come from and what she's done, but still holding people accountable for what they're accused of and what much of the evidence may look like that they have done. And then there was the added dynamic of Dr. Shanklin's attorney, who is, let's call Aubrey Williams certainly a force to be reckoned with and an experience in and of itself. I mean, and he's, Stephon has had his run-ins with Aubrey Williams too, and I think the most interesting part of that is they seem to come out of nowhere, and they're very unexpected. And so that's just one of the most interesting things about being a reporter or being on TV and being recorded when things happen, because your initial reaction to some things, someone like that, or I guess my initial reaction as a person to someone like Aubrey Williams is something very different than what I would want to be on TV. So there's the moment of your initial reaction, then there's the checking yourself and continuing to say, how can I use the way this person has just reacted to further my story, to make it more interesting. And the upside of his personality is it's great TV. And it makes a story that might otherwise be slow and boring into something of almost like a spectacle now. So there was that. What was it like with you? I remember this is after everything with Dr. Shanklin is sort of coming to an end. It's about a year later. She had just been allowed to keep her seat on the Metro Council, and we were coming to a press conference. And we were thinking this was the first time in a year we were going to talk to Barbara Shanklin, because for most of the time she had been under like a gag order by her attorney. You couldn't talk to her. And we'd only been hearing from Aubrey Williams. And so this was the time she was going to make a statement. She asked all the media, or the news media, or I'm sorry, the TV media, and I think she invited radio. They didn't invite the print media. They weren't too happy with the Courier Journal. So they invited us all there. We were sitting there. We had our microphones and cameras set up. And she had the statement. She read her statement. And at the end, it said, I would take some questions. However, right before she got there, apparently she conferenced with Aubrey Williams, who made a slight modification to her statement. And he crossed out the I will take some questions and wrote, my attorney will take some questions. And so a few of us made the mistake of still trying to ask Barbara Shanklin some questions. And I think Stephon was the first person who still tried to get Barbara Shanklin to answer a question. And then...
Well, I just say that's always weird for me, because this is my hometown. So I've known Dr. Shanklin since I was a kid. I've known Aubrey Williams since I was a kid. And so I have a great deal of respect for them. And I never want to be disrespectful. So I struggle with that a little bit. But again, I mean, she's a public figure, and I had to ask her questions that I think viewers want to know, because if I don't, they're going to email us and say, hey, why didn't you ask this, or why didn't you ask that? And so I was just doing my job. And I always say, I mean, really, you don't want to fight with people who have a camera, because then we're just going to play it over and over and over again. It's kind of out of my hands, because everybody saw it, and again, but that's one of the struggles that I have that maybe they don't have. In Cincinnati, I was more of a pit bull because I didn't care. It's not my hometown, but this is my hometown. So, I don't want to be putting the camera in somebody's face and yelling at them when, I used to go over their house when I was a kid or something.
So that happened.
Uh-oh. Do you have a filter?
Don't worry. First, I think you're seeing, number one, the difference in media. Television media has commercial concerns that we in public radio, as the NPR affiliate, don't necessarily have. Covering the Shanklin trial, I can say that I think everyone was pretty accustomed to Aubrey Williams, who had some history in this community, being pretty a gruff character. I think many people did have a negative reaction to when his comment to Karma. I think that that was something that was played over and over again. But at the core of the story, this was the same core of the story that involved the late Councilwoman Judy Green, which is how should council members spend those discretionary funds, and are they using those funds to benefit not only themselves, but family members and friends and political allies. Louisville is one of the few cities where council members, the people at the city level who make the laws, have discretionary money at their disposal. Here in Louisville, they have about $205,000 each to spend at their disposal. So that's a consistent question that is actually continuing now at the council level where they talk about reforms. It's interesting to me, and Stefan and I have this conversation all the time, about how when you do a controversial story, the blowback, and I call it really working the ref. I cover not only city government, but I also cover the U.S. Senate race. So I deal with Mitch McConnell, Allison London Grimes, Matt Bevin, etc. And really there's no way to please anyone. So I guess the way that I approach it is very different. My mentality is that we are exposing corruption. We are talking about issues of importance. My number one goal is to inform the audience. My second goal is to make sure we have a critical analysis of what's going on. And I think thirdly, we have to be fair to each side. And as Carl pointed out, Councilman Shanklin didn't want to talk oftentimes. She was very vocal, at least during the removal trial. But for those of us who were covering it from day one to the last day, I think it wasn't that surprising that she did end up getting off. There has been a political backlash to the council. But I think that when you talk about media, and all of us up here, no matter what story we do, keep in mind that each of us have to approach those stories differently, because some of us are assigned stories, some of us get to pick our own stories. As Carl mentioned, all of us are run by some economy. In the newspaper, the economy is space. How many words can you write about this particular story? Are you above the fold, below the fold, back page, A1? For TV, it's how many minutes your story is before the next segment. In public radio, we really don't have a lot of those commercial concerns. But I think influences how we all see stories differently. So from my perspective, there's also a Louisville native. I'm not really that concerned what you think about me. I really don't care what you think about me. I'm the least important part of the story. Because if you care about me, you are dead wrong as far as what the story is about. The story is not about the political personalities of the people who cover them, or the people who cover them. We are the least important people in the whole equation. The real equation you have to ask yourself is the media that I'm watching informing me about the story? And the real responsibility is on you, the viewer. You're the citizen. Your media diet is up to you. You get to decide if you watch CNN, Fox News, and read the Wall Street Journal, if you just go online and read TMZ all day. That's up to you. That's not up to us. So, for those who say the media should do different types of stories, you should certainly try to hold us accountable to that. Don't get me wrong. But I think when it comes to these stories we're talking about thus far, I think it really comes down to, we were trying to expose the situation that was going on in the council, and from my perspective, this is my perspective as the political editor at FPL, WFPL News, this story was about corruption and about the use of your money, taxpayer money, regardless of how you feel about that individual, me, or the council member or not.
As a journalist, I've been here since January. Like I said, my last market was Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is probably less than half the size of here. So I kind of feel like I haven't gotten my big story yet. So I've been on a lot of stuff. I did cover Shanklin. I covered a double murder. I had my first triple homicide here in Louisville, where the three guys kind of all shot each other. And so these are some type of crimes and type of stuff that you don't really deal with in a smaller city. So I'm still on my learning curve, but as far as maybe like the Cam trial, you'll get one of those types of stories, and then they usually will stick a reporter on, this is your story, this is your baby. And so I haven't got one of those yet. I'm waiting on it. But I'm still in the growing stage, so I'm like the infant here. But it's a good learning curve. I have been doing a lot. One story that I've been on lately a lot is Affordable Care Act. Something that affects a lot of people, and a lot of folks don't know about it. Can be a little boring for a news story, for TV. I mean, we think about boring. Y'all don't think about boring.
No, we don't.
They don't think about boring.
Yeah.
Right, they think about information. We think in terms of what makes good visuals. Yeah. But something definitely informative serves a lot of people.
I steal it really quick?
I think that's the reason the camp trial is not getting any national attention, is because it's boring. Because it's not Josh Young, you don't have cameras in the courtroom. You can't see a reaction. Everything is, if you're going to want pictures, it's got to be drawn by some guy. And I think TV as such, it is not public radio at all. I mean, it is not about information. It is about how long can I keep your attention so that you can watch this commercial about Trident.
But how important is the David Cam trial to people's lives?
That's a great question.
I mean, really. I mean, like,
It's
I
more
beg
about
to differ.
interest.
You
No, no, no.
honestly, you didn't see my story about how much it's costing us.
no, I didn't.
Yeah.
But my point, I guess, is that I think no one is joining in on we all know why trials are covered.
Yeah.
They're somewhat sensational. It's some of a disaster porn, really. It's like the idea of this, and it usually comes down to issues of race and class, but this guy, he murdered his wife, and he was a state trooper. But, like I said, each of us I'm not trying to devalue anyone's particular brand of journalism. What I'm saying is that each story that we do impacts different communities in different ways. For folks, one complaint that I'm sure we all get is, why do you all do negative stories? Everyone complains about why does the media do negative stories? My point is that I don't think that there is such thing as negative or positive news. There's news that's informative and there's news that's not informative. The real question isn't should the David Cam trial be covered, but it should be the lead story every night, like every day, like for years upon years. That's a legitimate question I think that we can ask, and I think that we all should be willing or at least open to being critical about, from not only with each other, but I think from the audience standpoint. I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't cover the David Cam trial. My point is that I don't know how often I've walked down the street and a resident has come to me and said, "Man, that David Cam trial." But maybe that's because I'm not. But then again, that's because maybe my audience is asking about something totally different than yours is.
Yeah, and the other thing though, and that's a question, or that's a debate that, I don't need it, I can talk about it now. That's a debate that, when people say that to me, why'd you do this, why'd you do that, I go, talk to the managers, because we don't decide what the lead story is.
Exactly.
We can
Exactly.
argue it to a certain degree, and then they're gonna say, well, they wanna go ahead and just go down the street and work somewhere. You know,
Yeah,
and so
and-
they
and-
decide,
and you
it's
may
not
have-
us
yeah,
saying that
those
David
different
Cam is
concerns.
gonna lead
Yeah.
every day.
Those decisions are made by news directors
And producers.
and not every reporter up here has the same freedom or ability to tell you what that lead story will be necessarily.
Let me,
Yes, sir, it's your show.
no. Keeping along those same lines, as we've had this conversation before in other places. Could anybody tell us how does a story, how does it come to fruition? How does, like say for instance, if the Little Sisters of the Poor are selling cookies down the street and they want to get coverage, right? I mean, it's probably not going to, the average person knows it's probably not going to get covered, especially if there's a triple shooting. How does a story come from Joe, private individual, to you, to the vetting process or whatever, to get to TV? And how often do you fight for a story that doesn't get covered?
Every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Well, I guess, maybe you want to talk about the morning meeting. How about this? TV news morning meeting.
Oh goodness, the
This is
morning
where it all
meeting.
starts.
Well, I don't know how it is in your newsroom, but we usually have to have about 3 stories that we pitch per reporter every day. That's kind of the standard. You have to go in there with 3 ideas, and you're going to be embarrassed if you don't have something to bring to the table. That doesn't mean they're going to listen to them. That doesn't mean they're going to like them. But you need to come in there and you need to say, hey, this is going on, hey, that's going on, I think we should do a story on this. And they might say, oh, well, you know what, there was a quadruple homicide, so I don't care about this charity event, I don't care about the starving children, we're going to have to cover this. Which, I mean, you just go in there, you pitch your ideas as a reporter, and then the news director and the producer is going to look at you and say, okay, so why should anyone care about that? Because ultimately it comes down to what the viewer is going to care about, what's going to impact the most people, and what's the most aesthetically and factually interesting. Because in broadcasting, just like Philip was talking and Stefan were talking, we have to think about what's going to be aesthetically pleasing to the viewer. That is a key component, because I can have all this great sound in the world, but it's really not going to look good if you see terrible pictures up with it. it has to kind of flow together, and you have to justify not only the kind of interviews you're going to get, but the kind of visuals you're going to have to accompany that. So once we get done with that, it depends on how many reporters in there. How many reporters are in your morning meeting usually? 5, yeah. I mean, they're going to assign you a story and say, okay, you're going to go out with this photographer, or if you're an MMJ, multimedia journalist, you're going to go out with yourself and you're going to shoot your own stuff, do your own interviews. But they'll assign it, and then they're going to stack the show based on, basically, the most relevant story is going to be in the top of the rundown, or what we call the A block, and the head of the newscast is going to be the story that impacts the most people, the one that's the most interesting, the ones that the viewers are probably going to find the most interesting or most important. And the stuff that's a little bit more fluffy, like a feature story, is probably going to go toward the end of that newscast. Or the stuff that you all might call positive news, as people like to label the negative stuff always leading the top of the newscast.
I've been very fortunate that I get to cover a lot of my own stories. I have kind of a different perspective. Like a good example, before Barbara Shanklin had the other issues, she called me and said, hey, I'm trying to help people get felonies off their records, people who did something when they were like 18 or 21. Now they're, real grown-ups, like in their 30s or 40s, and they can't find jobs. So I pitched their story, and what I did is I found a lady, she does hair, but she was trying to get a job at Humana, got in trouble when she was 18. I interviewed her, told the story through her eyes, and then I used Brandon as my legal expert and said, hey, what do people need to do? So that's kind of how I approach every angle. When somebody gives me a story, I think of, I find somebody to tell the story through their eyes, and I've been very fortunate that they let me do a lot of my own stories. I mean, some days I do, like last week they wanted me to do a story about, for the first time, the bridge construction was going to be on top of water, and I go, well, I don't care. I mean, can you drive on the new bridge? And they were like, but it affects a lot of people. And I said, but how many of them are going to get to drive on the bridge? And they were like, well, you're going to do the story. And then so when I went into my boss and said, is this really a story that we care about? And maybe I used some other words. And he said, well, you get to do 90% of your own stories, so go do the bridge story. So eventually I did it. But again, people like Dr. Shanklin pitched their story to me, and I said, can you find me somebody who's trying to get a felony or expungement? You remember that story? Yeah, and so that's kind of how I did it. I told the story through this lady. She's doing hair, but she wants to get this job at a desk at Humana, but the background check is a problem, and then I brought in my legal expert.
Can I see?
Is that my board too?
Stefan and I kind of talked about this. We've got totally different perspectives because you've been here for a while. He's got pull, he's got leverage. Somebody like me, when I pitch stuff, like I can only fight for it so far. And it doesn't have to be somebody like Barbara Shanklin that says, hey, I've got this idea. It could be anybody on the street. So right now I'm in the building contacts and networking part of life. So I give out a lot of business cards to anybody because everybody knows somebody, and they always come with, oh, I've got a, this is going on with me or whatever. And I'll listen. If it's good, I'll pitch it. But like I said, I can only go so far with trying to get stuff covered. If they say no, then I might have a rebuttal. Like I really, really think we should do this because X, Y, Z reiterate. But as far as like fighting with them and having closed door conversations, don't get that far. It's usually like, this is what you're doing. Okay, that was nice. Glad you feel that way. This has to be covered. This has to be covered. This has to be covered. We got 3 reporters. This is what you're on.
Well, I think one of the things that could help your case in that is that people in the community, we get a lot of viewer tips every single day. But if we get enough viewer tips on one subject, that's going to turn the heads of a news director or a producer, and that's going to make them think, okay, that's worthy of coverage. If they know enough people care about something that you don't see enough of on the news, the more people that come forward and send in the news tips, the more likely they are to say, okay, this is important to a lot of people.
I want to change the subject really quick. To go off what Philip said earlier about it's not about us, I think the most interesting thing has been the evolution of it being about us. With Twitter and social media, we are our own channels. And it might say my call letters and my Twitter handle, but it's me speaking. And a lot of times, look, I do sports, and I'm called a Kentucky fan and a Louisville fan on the same day. And it's a little bit less hectic, I think, than politics. But I think the really interesting development in this now is our voice carries well beyond the call letters. And I think a lot of times it's avoiding our own personal opinions and keeping it neutral. But it's really become, people want to tune in. If Karma's able to tweet something out that she's got some information on the story, they want to watch Karma that night. You know what I mean? And for you, you're representing your whole station. But I'm interested in what you think about, especially in politics. I'm always curious. You can stay unopinionated, but I can only imagine that people have put your opinions into a certain model, and how do you keep it to where it's seen as neutral?
Yeah, I think that Adam raises a great point, that maybe the U of L UK thing might be similar to politics to a degree, but like I said, I cover basically politics for the NPR station in Louisville. So NPR will come to me oftentimes, and I've done national stories on Senator McConnell, etc. As far as, I think you're definitely right, that Twitter and social networking has put us at the forefront. What I mean by it not being the most important part of the story is that people want it to be about me. They want the story somehow to, like they come to me and ask me, what is it that I should do? How should I vote? How should I? And I think that, as you all are hearing from these reporters up here, part of the pressure on what stories aren't told are your responsibility. Not every, it works very differently for me. I go in, they ask me, they say, what stories do you want to do today? But I tell them what we're doing today politically. I do. I have shot, when Chris Thiedemann was busted, you know Chris Thiedemann, ran for mayor, football player, Lughead. He was arrested for,
Hold on, lesbian.
He said Lughead.
Lughead.
Oh.
Biff.
We thought you said lesbian.
That was, no, not, I hope not. There's a sex change for that.
Yeah,
but,
I know.
Bit of a biff, but run for different offices before, all throughout the city, Congress, mayor. He got into a domestic dispute with his woman, and I guess they got into a little tussle. Someone stole her car. And I just told her, I said, we're not interested in that story. Which I'm not, and therefore we're not. And that's the end of the conversation. There's much more important going on as far as Senator McConnell's, today, his lawyer, making his case before the Supreme Court in regards to campaign finance contributions. I think that's much more important to you. Now you ask, why do I get to make that decision? Because I'm the one with the microphone. Like, at the end of the day, you have to trust these people up here, but at the same time, you do have to put pressure on their bosses to what stories you want told. If you're tired of always seeing, first of all, and I get all this stuff on about this all the time. One thing I don't like about television media, the only problem I have about covering West Louisville is that it always is the West End. Like, they never say neighborhoods. But you have to do that. That's not their fault. You have to do that. You have to force them to do that. Force us to do that. In regards to politics, I would say that our number one responsibility is to tell the truth. And there are many of us, particularly in public radio, not to just bag on television media, but a lot of us in public radio are sissies. We're just really afraid to state an opinion or state this because we don't want to be called biased. We're going to be called biased no matter what we do. Just today I get accused by Yarmouth's people for being biased because I didn't include him in the story. And then the McConnell people call me up about the exact same story and say I'm biased. Come on. At a certain point, we have to be willing to tell the truth, no matter who it upsets, no matter what they call it. And that's the part about it when I have a problem with reporters saying, well, I don't want to say that because I might lose something. To hell with that. That is the least important thing on my mind. Not getting invited to a luncheon or a gala. If you got into journalism because you want to become famous or because you want to be well liked, you are in the wrong business. This is a business where people are supposed to dislike you. So to answer the question finally, they are, because your job is to tell them the truth. Your job is to tell them your movement is a shithead movement. Your movement is dumb. Your movement is wrong. You're wrong about that. And you're telling this about people to their beliefs. You have to say that to them in some form or fashion. You have to prove them wrong. And they don't like that. This is America. We don't like to be told we're wrong about anything.
I don't think people realize the impact that an email has in a TV station either. I've done a lot of sports radio and I've done a lot of TV. And when you talk to management at a radio station compared to a TV station, they could not be different. I could get 50 phone calls about something I say on the radio and the boss comes in.